So in Unit 2, we're going to look at terrains and 3D environments and working with those and the basic character controllers that are included in Unity. There's a section of Unity manual devoted to terrains that you can look at that has some good background, and then I'm going to walk you through a tutorial on how to get things set up. So again, this terrain information about painting, working with textures and that sort of stuff, and painting trees and that sort of stuff is a good tutorial or good text version of what we're going to cover today. We're also going to have you look at, there's this 3D Buzz tutorial. 3D Buzz sells a lot of videos and video tutorials, but this beginning one in Unity is free, and so each one of these is maybe 5 to 10 minutes long. You may not want to go through all of these, but again, you might want to just go through some of these, especially if you like to learn more from videos than reading. So that's another alternative. So let's get started. I'm just going to run Unity here. So I've just started a new Unity project, and I've got this. Here's my scene here. I'm in the default layout here. So I've got my scene up here, my hierarchy over here, and then my project and assets down here, and my inspector over here. Start with, I'm going to have to add a terrain, and that's a 3D game object. So I'm going to go up to Objects, 3D Game Object, and find Terrain, and add a terrain. That'll add a really large plane. It's not really a plane, but it looks like a plane as far as you're concerned here to our screen. So that's our terrain, and it by default is named terrain. I'm not going to change that name. So it's going to set it up here. Now, when I click on the terrain over here, I'll see in the inspector different tools pop up, and in particular a lot of interesting tools pop up now. The one we're going to start looking at is, now I've got terrain selected. I can change the height map here, so I can select different paint brushes, and then I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. When I drag or draw or paint on the screen, it paints the height up different amounts. I can control the brush size, bigger brush sizes or smaller brush sizes here, depending on what I want. Often we don't want it this jaggedy, so the opacity controls that. So if I turn down the opacity, it doesn't make it so jagged as I click on it. If I click up the opacity, again, it gets very jagged very fast for this. And so again, I can control this. I also have some different brushes to choose different things. And then if I hold down Shift, it'll lower things down. But nothing can go below the standard default terrain height here that we have. So again, when I'm working with the terrain and the tools, I have to make sure I've terrain clicked on and used here. And again, I see this new terrain. This is the asset that was created for this. Now, while I'm working in here and I'm creating things, I want to save this. This is our scene, and we have to save our scene within our project. So since I've started working, I'm right away going to do save scene. And generally it saves right in your asset folder. That's what we want. Sometimes we create a scene folder if we have multiple scenes, but I'm just going to call this terrain sample scene. Okay, so now down in my assets here, I'm in my asset folder, I'll see that. And eventually here we will be creating folders and organizing this, but right now I just have a train and a sample train thing, so I'm not going to do that yet. So I'm also going to bring in some basic objects or packages here for working with the terrain. So I'm going to right click here and choose import packages, and I don't know if you can see this, so I'm going to choose character, and then there's environment is even below that. So I'm going to choose the characters first. It bump this up, and I could actually import all of this. Everything is checked. I'm just going to show you a little bit what's here. There are let me close some of these up. So there's the characters, the first person characters, a rollerball character, which is similar to what we had in the last tutorial, and a third person character, and then some cross-platform input that's used for like controlling your characters, whether or not you're on a tablet or touchscreen or things like that. So generally you want to bring in all of these. If you skip some of these, you'll lose some dependencies. You can, sometimes you don't want to bring in all the characters. So if I'm only going to do first person, I could skip some of these characters just to save some space. But for now, I'm just going to leave them all checked and import them. So these are part of the standard assets. So I have my standard assets folder here, and I can see my characters here that I have. Now with the standard assets, I'm also going to want to bring in some environmental stuff. I don't have any trees or any terrain, anything I can really do with the terrain unless I do some more import. So again, I'm going to right click here, do import package, and go down to environment. Sorry if you can't see that, but environment is going to be one of the things I'm going to check. Again, since I've already done the characters, it knows that it doesn't have to re-import the cross-platform input stuff, but it brings in all this environmental stuff with trees and water and terrain and things like that. So I'm just going to import those. So often when I'm working with a terrain, I want to see it from the character's point of view. Now we have both a first person and third person character. Let me show you the third person character first. So I'm going to go in the prefabs there, and I'm just going to grab this third person prefab, and I'm going to zoom in on that person. So third person prefab is, I actually see the character as an actual character there that walks around. If I work on this, oops, the camera will actually see that. My camera is set up over here with a different view, but I generally set up a camera to follow this character around, and I could see this. So that's a third person character. I'm not going to use a third person character for this. I'm going to use a first person character. So I'm going to go back here and go into first person characters, prefabs, and then I'm just going to start with the standard first person controller and put that on the screen. I'm going to double click on it to zoom in a little bit, and I'll see it's halfway in my terrain. I'm going to raise it up, otherwise sometimes it falls through the terrain. So I'm going to raise it up a little bit here. So the first person controller is made up of a first person character. That includes a camera here that we'll have. It also includes what's called an audio listener for it, and then that object is inside another object called the FPC controller, which has some of the code and information about that. I can control the walk speed, run speed, some of the information about how it works. It also has a rigid body, which we'll learn more later on, has certain physics, but it controls. It also has an audio source, and it'll play some sounds as I walk around. So now I have that first person controller here. Now I can see, now I have my scene and my game here. Remember, this is where I'll play my game. This is the scene here. So now if I play, I'm going to actually switch and just do this, play. It's set to do full screen when I play, but I can walk around and kind of see the scale of its terrain and that sort of stuff. I don't know if you can hear, but actually the footsteps you'll hear the footsteps as you play. I'm going to hit escape and stop this play here so that I can continue on. So I've got my first person controller here. Now there's also a rigid body controller, and this is actually better sometimes when you're first learning to play. It has some different collisions. The first person controller has special first person controller collisions. This has a standard collisions and events, and we'll see that more next week when we talk about coding events and things like that. So I often don't tell beginning users not to do the first person controller, but do the rigid body first person controller. And this works very similar. I can walk around and step. It doesn't do the steps sort of stuff, but again, similar movement and stuff like that. So I'm going to go back to terrain stuff and walk you through just some of the basics of the terrain stuff. So again, I'm going to click on my terrain and zoom out a little bit. I've got this big mountain range. I'm going to do, so we talked about how you can raise and lower things here. You can also raise and lower to a certain height, and it says hold shift. So I hold shift, I can click on a location. And now if I paint things, it'll just raise things up to that given height, kind of create a plateau. That's sometimes useful when you're trying to just raise a whole set of terrain or do something like that, because you can't lower the terrain beyond this point in any way. So again, I can raise that up to some point here. And again, you can change the brush types and the sizes and things like that. So there's also a smoothing editor, so that if you have too bumpy, you can do some smoothing. I'm not going to go into that too much. I'm going to talk about painting the terrain with a texture. So I'm going to go into here, click the paint brush for the texture, hit Edit Textures, and add a texture. Because usually there'll be some textures shown here, and there aren't any. So I'm going to add some textures. I'm just going to click on this first button, the RGB value. Since I imported the environmental controls, there should be a number of textures here. Now, a lot of these are associated with plants, and trees, and things like that, so I'm going to skip over those, all the broadleaf ones. I lost my window there. Okay, so I'm going to add this. I'm going to make this a little bigger so we can kind of see these. So there's a bunch of broadleaf, a bunch of symbols. I'm going to scroll down and skip over the grass. But here, this rocky hill, grass, rock, those are good tutorial values to select. And there's also one that's just called sand. So I'm going to choose this green one, the grass hill one. Close this. It'll have selected here and hit add. Now that'll add that here. Now I can actually add more textures. If I want, I can go down and select like the sand one and add these. So now, depending on which one I choose, I will paint. Now, whatever one I first load will load in the whole map with that. Now, as I select other ones, I can paint those things. And again, I can change my brush size and my opacity here to do some different kinds of painting. So often, like if we're, let's say we're doing a beach and we have some sand, I want to have the sand there and do things up. So let's just say I want to do that. I'm going to create, I've got an island here, and I want sand along the edge of the island here. And I want green grass kind of in the middle. And again, I can paint some height here so I can have some mountains or something like that as part of this valley. And again, I don't want to get them too high, so I can also use the shift to bring them down or up or things like that. Okay, so that's the basic terrain things, and we'll talk about the trees and stuff in just a little bit, but let's talk about water in here. So water is a special asset that's built in, it's in standard assets. So if I go under environment here, water and water basic are both here. I'm going to go into water basic and go into prefabs, and there's a basic nighttime. Now you might, sometimes Unity has this as icons, and I don't like it as icons because I often can't read the whole description. So I often scroll this whole down until I just get the descriptions here. So I've got water basic. I'm going to drag that out here and look at that. So it adds it to my hierarchy. I zoom in. I'm going to raise it up. It's actually under the ground a little bit, and there's my little puddle of water. I'm going to want to make that a little bigger, so I'm going to increase the scale of that maybe by let's say 50 by 50. I don't have to worry about the Y scale, just the X and Y scale. Oops, I was scaling my terrain. Sorry, I don't want to do that. I want to scale my water. Let's try that there. So I'll scale up the water here, and then I can set the height of the water here. So that's my basic water. Comes free with Unity and is easy to use. Now, there's also an advanced water that's available here, water and water 4. Let's just look at the prefabs for this. So this is a little more costly as far as computation goes, but has some neat things. I'm going to drag this water out there and put it here. Now, where's my first person controller? It's underwater here. I'm going to move it up and over. Let's see, where is this person? And set the person on the beach over here. So okay, so let's see. Where's my advanced water? I think I may have there. So I've got my first person controller here, and I can walk around and see the difference between these waters. So here's just, you know, basic water here. It has some simple waves here. Here's like the more complicated water values here and the reflection. So you can just get an idea of which, so you can decide which of these waters to use. For now, I'm going to just skip the advanced water and just do the basic water. I'm going to make it very much larger here so that it will fit this whole terrain. So I'm just going to increase the size of it. Scale it up so that I just have a better island here. And again, I can control the height of this water here. Okay. Let's just talk a little bit more about a couple more things as far as terrain goes. We've looked at painting. We've looked at painting these textures a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about trees. Again, with trees, there's no trees defined. I have to go up and add a tree. No game objects. I can click here and select. There's just a couple trees involved. There's a palm tree here I could select and add that. I can add edit tree, add another tree. And there's a broadleaf tree here, or a pine tree, either one I can select. So now, depending on which one I paint, I'll get the trees. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here and change my brush size. Now, I have to watch if I paint trees. I click once and wait a second, it paints a whole bunch of trees. Trees tend to be a little expensive and we get lots of them, so I often like to bring down the density of the trees a little bit and zoom out a little bit and just click a couple different times. Often, you know, you can change the brush size down. Let's go to where my first person controller is a little bit. Yeah, right there in the middle of the trees. And again, I can paint. If I go back to train, I can select different kinds of trees to paint different types of trees. Now with these trees, you can also set their height. They are random values, and so you can actually change the range here, so you get some taller and shorter trees as you want that you work with. And then when you walk around the train, you'll see these trains, these trees. Okay. One last thing we're going to look at is this paint detail. It lets us paint things like grass and things like that. I'm going to add a grass texture. Hit here, select some grass. So I'm going to scroll down and just get this grass fronds here. Sometimes it is hard to tell which ones are textures and which ones are used in different things. So you might have to experiment a little, and things don't turn out well. Make sure you try a different type of texture. Once you get to know the standard assets a little bit better, you get to know which ones are which. So now when I have this, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on where I am at here. And again, I can go back to terrain and I can paint. And again, I have my brush size and density, and this is going to paint grass. I often like to keep the opacity really down low. If it's up high, you get huge chunks of grass, which tend to be kind of expensive and slow down your game. So I often like to use this slow. But now when I've got this grass painted off, I'll get this waving grass around as an option. So now there's more things you can do as far as refining the texture. The textures here and how you import them. You can refine again sizing of this sort of stuff. We're not going to go into too much detail. I just want to get to the basics of this. Being able to use a first-person controller in here, place that, and control the heights and just do some simple creations here. In the participation activity, we'll talk about also bringing in, importing and exporting packages here and placing some prefab, some objects on the screen also, and how that works in the participation stuff. But this just gives you a basic introduction to this. Now I'm done. I'm going to save my scene, and I've got my scene done here. So I've got my standard assets, my terrain, and then my scene. That's all that I have in this area. So hope you enjoy this.